Okay, this is project planning one. We're going to talk about strategy, stakeholders, scope, tailoring, and integration. Project planning creates a structure that connects strategy, stakeholders, scope, and execution. In this session, we'll begin shifting from initiation to planning. And at a high level, planning involves establishing scope, refining objectives, and defining the course of action needed to achieve the project's purpose. We'll look at 5 connected planning topics. First, we'll examine strategic planning in projects, programs, and portfolios, and consider how project work supports broader organizational direction and value delivery. PMI describes projects, programs, and portfolios and operations as part of a larger system for value delivery rather than isolated activities. Next, we'll discuss planning for stakeholder communication and information distribution. And it's not about schedules and scope. It also includes deciding what information needs to be shared, with whom, when, and how. The planning process group includes communications planning as part of building an effective overall project approach. We'll also examine process tailoring, which means adapting methods, processes, and artifacts to fit project context. PMI emphasizes that project management should be tailored to the project's need and that no single set of processes should be applied mechanically every time. And I believe the PMBOK used to say that the processes that they define apply to most projects most of the time. And I think now they would probably add and tailored to project context. From there, we'll turn on to planning project scope, including the basic idea that scope planning helps define what work is included and how that work will be structured. And finally, we'll discuss planning integration, which involves bringing the different parts of planning together into a single coherent project approach. Overall, this is an overview. So the goal is not to do a technical deep dive, but to build a conceptual foundation for planning in project delivery. Why planning matters. Project planning creates a structure that connects strategy, stakeholders, scope, and execution. It matters because it gives the project workable structure before major execution begins. At a basic level, planning is the work of establishing scope, refining objectives, and defining the course of action required to achieve the project's purpose. That means planning is not about paperwork. It's the process of turning a broad idea or authorized effort into something more organized, intentional, and manageable. Planning also matters because projects do not operate in isolation. Projects are connected to organizational goals, stakeholder expectation, resources, constraints, and future outcomes. Without planning, teams may begin work without a clear understanding of what they're trying to accomplish, who needs to be informed or engaged, and what work is included and how the project should be coordinated. The key point here is that project planning creates alignment. It helps to connect strategy into action, stakeholders to communication, scope to deliverables, and the different parts of project management into one coherent approach. Good planning does not eliminate uncertainty, but it gives the project team a stronger basis for execution, coordination, and adaptation as the project moves forward. Strategic planning in projects, portfolios, and programs. Projects support strategy, while programs and portfolios align multiple efforts to maximize organizational value. Here we introduce the idea that project planning should be understood on a broader strategic context. A project does not usually exist for its own sake. It exists because the organization is trying to achieve something larger, whether that goes solving a problem, responding to stakeholder needs, improving a product or service, or advancing a strategic goal. At the project level, planning focuses on a specific effort with defined objectives, deliverables, and outcomes. At the program level, related projects are coordinated so the organization can gain benefits that would be harder to achieve if each project were managed separately. The portfolio level, leaders look across projects, programs, and other work to ensure resources and investments align with strategic priorities. This is important because not every project has the same strategic value. Some projects directly support major institutional or business priorities, while others may be lower priority or more tactical Strategic planning helps organizations decide which work should move forward and how efforts fit together and where to focus limited resources. The key takeaway is that planning is not about internal project documents. It's also about understanding how project work fits into the larger system of organizational direction and value delivery. When projects and programs and portfolios are aligned, project planning becomes more meaningful because the work is clearly connected to larger purpose. Planning for stakeholder communication and information distribution. Effective project planning includes deciding what information stakeholders need, when they need it, and how it should be shared. An important part of project planning is deciding how information will move through the project. Stakeholders do not all need the same information, and they do not all need it in the same way. Some stakeholders need detailed working information, while others may need summary level updates on decisions, risk, or milestones. Planning for stakeholder communication involves considering several practical questions. Who needs the information? What information do they need? When do they need it? How should it be shared? And how often should communication occur? These questions help the project manager create a more intentional communication approach instead of relying on ad hoc updates. This topic also connects closely to stakeholder engagement. Communication is not only about sending messages, it's also about supporting understanding, alignment, trust, and participation. When communication is poorly planned, stakeholders may feel uninformed, confused, or disconnected from project decisions. When communication is planned well, the project team is better able to coordinate work, manage expectations, and keep people appropriately informed. The key idea is that information distribution should be purposeful. Project communication should match stakeholder needs in the context of the project, rather than treating every stakeholder the same way. When I was starting out in project management, I came out of the operations area, and I had the tendency to, when things were going well, I would just work and I didn't communicate much out. And it kind of caught me by surprise that stakeholders saw that as a negative condition for the project. In other words, it's human nature, I think, to kind of assume that things aren't going well if you don't have any information. So I learned to put together a good communication plan and keep people engaged. And one thing I found is that if you keep them engaged, when you do have a problem, they're more than willing to help you succeed, generally. Occasionally, you'll have those stakeholders that want to sabotage what you're doing, but usually that's for some non-productive purpose, political or something like that. For the most part, if you let them know what's going on, they'll help you out. Information flow in modern project work. Project communication is not one-way reporting. It's part of an ongoing information flow that keeps planning, decision-making, and execution aligned. In modern project work, communication should be understood as information flow rather than simply reporting. Reporting is part of communication, but it's only one piece. Information moves across the project in multiple directions. Team members share working information with one another. Project managers communicate status, risk, and decisions to sponsors. And stakeholders provide feedback, raise concerns, and influence planning and priorities. This matters because projects are dynamic. As work moves forward, the project team needs current information to make decisions, coordinate tasks, respond to issues, and keep expectations aligned. If information flows poorly, teams may continue working with outdated assumptions, stakeholders may feel disconnected, and decisions may be delayed or made without the right context. A good information flow includes both formal and informal communication. Formal communication may include status report, milestone updates, or decision logs. Informal communication may include working discussions, quick clarifications, issue resolution, and collaborative planning conversations. Both of these matter. The key idea is that communication supports the movement of information needed to keep the project functioning as a connected system. In that sense, planning for communication is really planning for how information will move, how feedback will be gathered, and how people will stay aligned as the project work continues. What is process tailoring? Process tailoring means adapting project processes, methods, and artifacts so the approach fits the context of the work. Process tailoring means adjusting the project approach so it fits the specific need of the project rather than applying every process, document, or method exactly the same way every time. Not all projects are alike. Some are small, some are straightforward, others are more complex, uncertain, or highly regulated. Because of those differences, project managers need to think carefully about how much structure is needed, what artifacts are useful, and which methods best support project work. One of the things that we're seeing now in modern project management is this context view of defining the project approach to fit the needs of each individual project. That's a change from not too long ago when companies would adopt a standard process and then they would try to apply that standard process to every single project, no matter how large or how complex or how much uncertainty was. Now the idea is to take a look at what we're trying to deliver and what environment it's in and adapt what we know about these processes to help enable success of the project. In practice, tailoring may affect the level of detail in the plans, formality of communication, and the number of project artifacts, the choice of development approach, or the way scope, schedule, and risk are managed. A project with high uncertainty may need a more iterative planning, while a more stable project may benefit from a more structured, predictive approach. The key point is that tailoring is not about skipping discipline. It's about applying discipline appropriately. Good tailoring helps a team avoid unnecessary bureaucracy while still maintaining enough structure, visibility, and control to manage the project effectively. Process tailoring helps make project planning practical. It allows the project manager to shape the approach to fit the project context, the organization, and the stakeholders involved. Planning project scope. Planning project scope defines what work is included, what deliverables are expected, and where the project boundaries lie. Planning the project scope is one of the most important parts of early planning because it helps define the work the project is actually expected to accomplish. At a high level, scope planning answers questions such as what are we trying to deliver, what work is included, what's not included, and how should the work be organized so it can be managed effectively. In PMI's process-based planning view, scope planning includes several connected activities. These include planning how a scope will be managed, collecting requirements, defining scope, and creating the work breakdown structure. Together, these activities move the project from a broad idea to a more defined understanding of what the project is supposed to produce and how the work can be arranged. This matters because unclear scope creates confusion very quickly. If stakeholders do not share the same understanding of project boundaries, the team may take on work that was never intended, miss important deliverables, or struggle with challenging and changing expectations. Good scope planning helps to reduce that confusion by creating a clearer picture of what's the project deliverables, boundaries, and major components. In this course, the key point is not to memorize every technical detail of the planning, but to understand that scope planning gives shape to the project. It turns the project from a general intention into work that can be understood, organized, discussed, and later controlled. Scope planning produces structure. Once the project scope has been planned and defined, the project begins to take on a more usable structure. This is why scope planning matters. It does not only clarify what the project is supposed to accomplish, it also helps organize the work into a form that people can understand, communicate about, and manage. At the beginning of the project, ideas are often very broad. Stakeholders may agree on the general purpose of the project, but they may not yet share the same understanding of actual deliverables, boundaries, or work components. Scope planning helps reduce ambiguity by creating a more structured view of the project. That structure is important because the work is easier to plan, estimate, assign, and monitor. It also helps the team communicate more clearly with stakeholders about what's included in the project and what's not. In practical terms, scope planning creates the foundation that later supports scheduling, budgeting, and resource planning and control. The key is that scope planning produces order and helps transform a broad project concept into something more concrete and more manageable, which is essential for effective project delivery. And so what they're showing here is that we have this broad concept. We do all this planning and we wind up with a work breakdown structure, which is the structured project work. PMI's the new definition or the new term for work breakdown structures called project structure. And I like that. One reason I like it is because you can use that same language to use in any one of the approaches in any project. The work breakdown structure kind of implies that it's a predictive, but you can have work structure like in agile or adaptive environments, you have backlogs that you manage at different levels, and those backlogs contain different items in decreasing detail, just kind of like a work breakdown structure does. It's just not organized in the same way. So planning integration, we want to integrate all of this. It brings the parts of a project together so that scope, communication, resources, and risk stay aligned. Planning integration is the idea that the different parts of project planning should not be treated as separate islands. Scope, schedule, communication, resources, risk, and stakeholder engagement and execution planning all influence one another. A decision made in one area often creates effects in another. For example, a change in scope may affect schedule, resources, stakeholder expectations, and risk exposure. This is why integration matters. It helps the project manager keep the planning effort connected rather than fragmented. Instead of thinking only in narrow categories, the project manager has to step back and consider how the parts fit together and whether the overall plan remains coherent. The PMI describes integration not only at the process level, but also at the cognitive and context levels. That means integration is partly about connecting formal planning activities, but it's also about how the project manager thinks across the whole project and its environment. The point here is that planning integration is what makes the overall plan work as a system. Without integration, planning can become disconnected, inconsistent, and harder to manage. With integration, the project team is better able to coordinate decisions, maintain alignment, and support more effective delivery. This week builds on planning foundation, and next week extends into schedule, cost, and procurement for a more detailed tailoring decision. So this is a look ahead into week 4. As we look to week 4, the focus shifts from broad planning foundation that we covered here to several more detailed planning areas. And we emphasize this week planning connects strategy, communication, tailoring, scope, and integration. And those ideas provide a framework for understanding why project planning matters and how its major parts fit together. Next week, we'll build on that by looking more closely at how project managers tailor models, methods, and artifacts to the project's needs. And we'll also move into more specific planning work involving the schedule, cost, and procurement. And these topics will take the broader planning ideas from this week and apply them in a more concrete way. And in that sense, week 3 and 4 fit together closely. This week is planning 1, and we have planning 2. It's about understanding the planning foundation, and next week is about applying that foundation to additional planning areas that are essential for organizing, resourcing, and delivering the project effectively. In conclusion, effective project planning builds a coherent foundation that connects strategy, communication, tailoring, scope, and integration. The central message from this week is that project planning creates a foundation for effective delivery. It's not just about preparing documents, it's about shaping the project so that its goals, stakeholder scope, and execution approach are connected in a meaningful and manageable way. The second takeaway is that different parts of planning influence one another. Strategy, communication, scope, tailoring, and integration should not be treated as isolated topics. Strong planning depends on seeing how they fit together as part of one broader system. Another important point is that planning should be practical and fit for purpose. This is why tailoring matters. A project manager should not automatically apply the same level of detail, formality, or documentation to every project. Instead, the planning approach should reflect the size, complexity, uncertainty, and stakeholder needs of the project. And finally, this week provides the planning foundation, and the next builds on it. In week 4, we'll move into additional planning areas such as schedule, cost, procurement, and more detailed tailoring of models, methods, and artifacts. And the 2 weeks together will help us see how both conceptually and the conceptual foundation of planning and its more detailed application. So we'll be able to see how the 2 work together as we go through the 2 weeks work together. That's the end. Your time and effort is a commitment to your growth and development. And I'm happy that we were all here.